burnt ends that won't burn up your bank account. Today I'm going to be walking you through a recipe for poor man's burnt ends. What this is a recipe still using beef, but it's a cheaper and less time-consuming alternative to standard burnt ends. Classic burnt ends are those crispy edges and corners that come off your brisket after a long, intensive smoking process. What we're going to do today is cut that process down to a 2-stage smoke and wrap, and we're also going to use a cut of meat that's a lot cheaper and more readily available. Instead of cutting off the pieces at the end of our smoke, we're going to start with the chuck roast and cut the pieces down to our bite size so that we can season heavily and then get them on the smoker. Let me show you how I did that. For our poor man's burnt ends, we're going to be using chuck roast. Chuck roast is a very common cut of beef that you can find pretty much anywhere. And you can buy it in smaller quantities compared to the larger 10, 15-pound brisket that you find. And this process is going to be something a little closer to a pork belly burnt end, where we cut it up before we smoke it, and that'll just help us with timing and help push this a little faster. I'm going to take off a bit of fat. We don't want that in there. We want all this beautiful marbling to break down. A little fat is fine. Now, one of the reasons why I do them a little bigger is because these are going to shrink. As that fat starts to render and come out of the meat, they're going to get a lot smaller. There are ways to do this that start with the whole chuck roast, smoking it, breaking it down afterwards, but I find that this process works a little better because then it won't shred as much. For our binder, I'm going to be using our Bier Hall stone ground mustard, which is going to be a really basic flavor profile. But what this is going to do is help our seasoning adhere to the meat really well so that once it's on the smoker, it doesn't slough off. Going to get that really well mixed and coated. And today we're going to be using our Texas Rodeo Rub. It's going to be a nice beefy, smoky, slightly spicy flavor, which is going to complement our poor man's burnt ends really well. We want to season these very heavily because burnt ends are supposed to be very flavorful, so we want to get as much seasoning on there as we can. And once we're all seasoned up here, we're going to let these sit at room temperature for about 20 to 25 minutes, and that's just going to help bind that seasoning onto the meat a little bit better. After about 3.5 to 4 hours on the grill, 165-degree point is where we hit our stall, so we want to start a wrap. A wrap or a braise like we're going to set up is going to help accelerate the process to get that temperature up so that it gets up to that 200, 204-degree range where it's nice and shreddable, super tender and super flavorful. Now in this process we're using Cherry Bomb. I think the fruit flavors and the smokiness and a little bit of heat that this sauce offers is going to be great for our burnt ends. I like to heat up my sauce with the butter first because that way we're not slowing down the cooking process. If we add cold sauce and cold butter to our pan, we're delaying the process to heat those up and possibly cooling down our meat, and that's just something we want to avoid. So I heated it up in a saucepan and we're going to pour it in. Now we're going to cover with foil. This way, all those juices and all that steam that's going to help cook is going to be trapped in there. And now we're going to go back onto our smoker for probably another 3.5 hours until these burnt ends are really nice and tender. Then we'll let them rest for a little bit and we'll be ready to try them. All right, so our poor man burnt ends are nice and tender at this point. They're about that 204-degree internal temperature, although I didn't really check it. I just used a fork to make sure they were nice and tender. You can tell they're ready because they're going to start to shred a little bit if you apply some pressure. So I did that, and now we're going to do our last step. I'm going to take them out of the braise here. I'm going to take them out of the braise and I'm going to set them on a wire rack to go back onto the smoker for a final time. I'm gonna give them a little baste of the barbecue sauce and butter that I have in here. And then we're gonna go for a little bit of caramelization, a little bit of tackiness on the outside of our burnt ends to really give it that last little sticky, delicious finish. So I have a foil lined tray with a rack on it, and these beauties are just ready to fall apart, which is awesome. So they're gonna be nice and tender for our final product. We're just gonna line them up here, and we'll go back onto the smoker. And it should only take probably about 30, maybe 40 minutes, because all the cooking is done. So all we're looking for is drying out and tacking on, getting a little bit of caramelization on that sauce on the outside. So we're gonna take some of the sauce and just baste, make sure our burnt ends are nice and coated in sauce. Just pack on that flavor. And back into the smoker we go. As suspected, it took about 25 minutes to tack on our sauce really nicely. And then we let them rest here for about 10 minutes, just so we can handle them a little better. And now we'll plate them up and we'll be ready to try. Also, a little hack is I took the remaining sauce from the aluminum foil pan that we cooked these in, and I saved that. I strained off a little bit of the excess grease and basted, you saw, but then the rest of the sauce I'm setting to the side here so we can dip if we want to. And that sauce is absolutely packed with flavor. It starts with our Cherry Bomb, which is a phenomenal sauce, but then we're adding these beef flavors, some extra rub, and the butter flavors too. So that sauce right there is absolutely incredible. So we want to save all that for our final product. If you want, you can give them a little extra baste at the end, but they should be really quite well packed with flavor. Now, let's give them a try. These look phenomenal. You can tell they're a little dried out, just like a burnt end would be, but they're very tender and they look super flavorful. So we'll see what we got. Some of the best burnt ends I've ever made, honestly. There's a beautiful little bit of crust on the outside, but then once you get the inside, it's beautifully tender, juicy, ultimately very, very flavorful. This sauce complements the beef beautifully, and I'm really happy with the way this turned out. So over the course of about 7 or 8 hours, this labor of love turned out really well. The flavor's there, the texture's there. You'd think you were eating regular burnt ends, but this is a lot cheaper and takes a lot less time. For this recipe, as well as some of the products used in this video, check out psseasoning.com. If you like this video, please click subscribe, and be sure to check us out on all forms of social media. Until next time, I'm Chef Jed. Thanks for watching.